Thank you, thank you. Thank you for my favorite song. And all blessings to blacks. Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley. Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, political leader of the People's National Movement and Prime Minister. Other members of my head table, the Member of Parliament for Horquetta Talparo, Minister of Youth, the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin Central, Minister of Communications, other distinguished ministers of government, too numerous to mention, other party executives, members of the leadership, party stalwarts, chairman of the Diego Martin Regional Corporation, party members, supporters, friends, the media. My job tonight is to deal with the misinformation that is out there in the system. If you listen to the commentators, the naysayers, the know-it-all experts, the opposition, and the editors, you would think that this country is in a terrible condition and that the PNM government of 2015 to 2020 and the current PNM government has done absolutely nothing. So I decided to look at the budget measures from our first budget in 2016. And what did we do in 2016? And remember, that is a period when I was appointed Minister of Finance. I came into the ministry, got a visit from the then governor of the central bank, who told me, you better organize some money fast, because if you don't, within the next 2 to 3 days, I'm going to turn off the tap. So I asked the gentleman, what do you mean by turn off the tap? This is not the Ministry of Public Utilities. He said, you only have enough money left in the overdraft in the government's bank account to run this country for 3 days. And that is because the former administration had spent everything, spent all the cash reserves, bankrupted the National Gas Corporation, utilized the entire overdraft of $9 billion, burnt up the $5 billion in credit they met there, and so on. About $30 billion in cash they burnt up. So we had to run quick, borrow money, because if we did not do that, we would not have been able to pay public servants' salary in the month of September 2015. That's the first month we came into office. That's what we had to deal with. They spent out all the money. But what did we do in that first budget? Because we had gone to the public with a manifesto in 2015, and we had told the population what we intended to do if and when we got into government. So despite that situation, not a penny in the treasury, the PNM had said that when we got into office to help working families, we would increase the personal tax allowance from $60,000 a year or $5,000 a month to $72,000 a year or $6,000 a month. And despite only having 3 days money left in the treasury, we did that in our first year in office, so that everybody earning $6,000 or less would then be exempt from income tax. What else did we do? We reduced the rate of value-added tax because we had put that into our manifesto. We reduced the rate of value-added tax from 15% to 12.5%. What else did we do in that first year where we were seeing trouble? We recognized that pensioners were having difficulty living on their fixed incomes, so we increased the cap on persons in receipt of both national insurance and old age pension by an additional $500, putting $500 a month more in the pockets of these retired senior citizens. We increased the cap to $5,000 a month. We had also promised to respect our elders, so we created a program for retirees by introducing free driver's permits, free passports for persons over the age of 60. We also had indicated we would increase the stipend for persons on the on-the-job training program. We did all of that in our first year in government. And remember, that was a year when the price of oil dropped to $26 a barrel. $26 a barrel. And if I go into the records now, and I look at what was happening in that year, in 2016, and I look at revenue, the former administration, they were very fortunate to receive revenue in their last year in office of $57 billion. Within 1 year, that had dropped to $44 billion. We lost $13 billion in that first year because of the collapse in oil prices, the collapse in natural gas prices, and some very unfavorable tax concessions that the former administration had introduced for oil and gas companies. So that was year one. Struggling to pay salaries, struggling to deal with this gift that they gave to us. But we persevered. What did we do in 2017? Still struggling along, eh? We decided, consistent with the mandate and the vision of the People's National Movement, that we would give further relief to persons at the lower end of the income spectrum. So we introduced for the first time a rebate on electricity bills for persons whose bill was $300 or lower, and gave them a 25% rebate. This is while we're still struggling. And what I haven't said, I will say now. The former administration, in addition to burning up $30 billion in cash, also gifted us with $5 billion in back pay that we had to pay public servants based on agreements reached in the election year. So we did that too. We paid the back pay as well, $5 billion. Wasn't easy. So we continue to struggle. But consistent with our mandate as a people-oriented party, consistent with our mandate to manage the economy effectively, we did a number of things in the 2019 budget to encourage people to buy their own homes, to encourage young families to become homeowners. We increased the threshold for exemption from stamp duty on first-time residential property from $850,000 to $1.5 million. This meant that any working family could now purchase a house up to $1.5 million or apartment without paying any stamp duty. This saved first-time homeowners $37,000 in stamp duty. But that wasn't all. We were dealing with everyone. We increased the value of the food cards at the lower end from $410 a month to $510 a month. For the middle group, persons with 4 to 5 persons in the household, from $550 a month to $650 a month. For households at the upper end, 6 or more persons, from $700 a month to $800 a month. We did all of that in 2019 while still struggling to deal with this situation that we had been gifted by the former administration, with oil prices crashing. We also increased the disability grant and allowed persons under the age of 18 for the first time who are disabled, differently abled, to access the disability grant. We also increased the public assistance grant for one person from $1,150 a month to $1,300. Two persons, $1,400 to $1,550. Three persons, this is people in a household who are in receipt of public assistance, $1,600 to $1,750. Four or more persons, there are many situations where people have to look after children whose parents have passed away or the father is incarcerated or something like that. Four or more persons from $1,750 to $1,900 a month. And we increased again the cap on persons in receipt of both national insurance and old age pension from $5,000 to $6,000 a month. And recognizing that, again, there are many families struggling to educate their children, we increased the allowance tax deduction for higher education expenses from $60,000 a year to $72,000 a year. Did all of that in 2019. Let's go to 2020. They say we do nothing. Eh? And we do all that while we're struggling with crippling debt, while we're struggling to deal with the fact that we came into government without more than enough money to run the country for 3 days. What did we do in 2020? We increased the on-the-job training stipend again. And we increased the minimum wage from $15 an hour to $17.50 an hour. That benefited 194,000 working persons. We increased the personal allowance at the airport for value of personal goods from $3,000 to $5,000. We increased tax allowances for sponsorship of fashion, audio and video productions, local entertainment, etc. We amended the Cooperative Societies Act to increase the limit for transfer of shares to a beneficiary upon death of a member from $5,000 to $50,000. That was something the credit union movement was crying out for years. We increased the wages of CPEP workers by 15%, URP workers by 15%. Did all of that in 2020. And a consistent theme throughout, from the beginning, we decided to make agriculture a tax-free industry. What did we do in 2021? We introduced a measure to give free Wi-Fi for impoverished or challenged students. And the Minister of Education would have reported that we have given out thousands of these mobile Wi-Fi devices to allow our students to access learning on the internet at home where they don't have internet facilities, their parents can't afford it. We have given the children a mobile Wi-Fi device. It's called a MiFi. Thousands of them, thousands. And again, to encourage first-time home ownership, we increased the stamp duty again, the threshold from $1.5 million to $2 million. Again, encouraging construction of homes and encouraging people to purchase their own homes. And again, we had already increased the personal income tax allowance from $5,000 a month to $6,000 a month when we came in. We sent it up again to $7,000 a month, again benefiting 250,000 individual taxpayers, so that anybody earning $7,000 a month under this PNM is now exempt from income tax. We did all of that. And let's come now to 2022. And what are the things? Well, that was all about COVID relief, stimulus for the manufacturing sector, utility rebates, the 25% rebate that we had agreed to back in the early years. We increased that to 35% for persons who have electricity bills of $300 or less. We also increased the number of items that are exempt from VAT, the number of basic foods. So that is just a little snapshot of the measures that this PNM government has been able to introduce, positive, productive, helpful, people-oriented measures over the last 6 years in the face of that catastrophe that they handed us in 2016. And let me give you some of the numbers. They talk a lot, but let me give you the facts. The former administration enjoyed income in fiscal 2014 of $58 billion. Fiscal 2014, fiscal 2015, $57 billion. Fiscal 2013, $53 billion. We have never seen $50 billion in our period over the last 6 years. Never. In fact, we had a situation during COVID where oil went to zero. I don't know how many of you all remember that. On one strange day, the price of oil went to zero and then turned negative when the first restrictions from the pandemic came in and the whole world shut down. There was no demand for oil. It went to zero. We had to deal with that. In fact, our oil company had to store oil for 3 months because it was costing more to produce the oil than you could get for it if you sell it. It was costing $28, $30 a barrel to produce oil, and oil was selling for zero, and then 10, and then 20, and eventually after 3 or 4 months it inched up to about 29, and then we were breaking even, and we were able once again to see we had to store the oil for 3 to 4 months. That is what we as a government have had to do over the last 6 years. They enjoyed revenue of $55 billion, $57 billion, $53 billion, $56 billion. We dropped down to $36 billion in fiscal 2017 when the full impact of the collapse of oil prices hit us. When $20 billion just disappeared from the government revenue, just like that, whaps, $20 billion just disappeared. And we began a steady climb up with all of the incentives and the prudent management of this economy. We climbed from 36 to 43 to 47. So it was 36 in 2017, 43 in 2018, 47 in 2019, and then COVID hit. Drop us back down to $34 billion. And 2021 was also $37 billion. So how did we manage all of that? We took a conscious decision, despite these economic difficulties, despite revenue dropping from $58 billion to $34 billion. That is $24 billion in revenue just disappearing just so. We took a conscious decision as a PNM government that we will try and keep everybody in jobs. We took a decision. We decided not to crash the economy. We decided to keep economic momentum going. We decided to keep public servants employed, to keep teachers employed. We made that decision. And the way we were able to do that is we had to borrow. So, because you don't have the revenue anymore, you want to keep people in jobs, you want to keep the country running, you want the public service to function, you want the private sector to function, so we had to borrow. So every year, for years, we have been running a substantial budget deficit. A deficit is the difference between revenue and expenditure. And what we recognize as a government is this country, it would be very difficult for people in this country to survive if we reduce spending below about $50 billion. The other side had taken it up to 63. We have been able to get it down to 50. And I can tell you, what on earth were they doing with that additional $13 billion? Because public servants still employed, WASA still operating, lights still working, people still in jobs. So what on earth was that other administration spending that additional $13 billion on? But we came to the conclusion that you can't drop below 50 and you have to get it up to 52, 53, 54 in order to have positive growth in Trinidad and Tobago. So we borrowed. So every year we have had to run a budget deficit, and some years have not been easy at all. The first year of COVID, we dipped into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. That is what it was for. It was a rainy day fund. to keep body and soul together, to keep Trinidad and Tobago alive, we had to finance the budget to the tune of $16.6 billion. We took some from the Heritage Fund and we borrowed the rest. In 2021, still in the pandemic, we had to finance the budget to the tune of $13.7 billion, and every number I'm calling there is money that we're borrowing or money that we're withdrawing from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So we've been financing your livelihood. We've been financing the services that the government provides to Trinidad and Tobago through a combination of prudent management, borrowing, and drawdowns from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And with all that, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund is still in excellent shape after almost 7 years. After almost 7 years. Now let me turn to some recent developments. You know, they have people in this country who are so uninformed and so negative and so out of touch with reality. They just talk foolishness every time they speak. Recently, a couple days ago, the Central Statistical Office updated its economic data on its website. Now, I'll give you some insight into this, because about 2 years ago, we were approached by all the international agencies to be part of a global movement to have complete transparency in economic data. We signed up. Matter was approved by Cabinet. The Ministry of Finance signed up, so every 3 months we send economic data to the World Bank, to the IMF. They publish it on their website. We send them details of revenue, income, expenditure, debt, etc. It's all published. And we got the Central Statistical Office to fall in line. So they are now doing the same thing. So a couple days ago, the Central Statistical Office updated its data. They're still quite behind time, but they updated their data for the third quarter of calendar 2021. And by that I mean they updated the economic data for Trinidad and Tobago up to the end of September 2021. Now, when I delivered the 2022 budget in October of 2021, the CSO was only able to provide us with data up to the end of June 2021. And the data wasn't encouraging. It wasn't looking that pretty. We asked the CSO to try and do their best and give us more up-to-date data, but they were unable to do so. Now they've updated the data. And what I am seeing from these figures is that there was a tremendous recovery in the Trinidad and Tobago economy in the third quarter of 2021. And we haven't got December 21 figures yet. And I dare say that the production in the Trinidad and Tobago economy was at least equal to what occurred in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, I dare say better. Because in the last 3 months of 2021, economy was opening up. The public health restrictions were being relaxed gradually over time. So more and more businesses were opening up. Oil production was increasing. Gas production was increasing. Non-oil activity was increasing. So I dare say that the production in the last 4 months of 2021 was equal to or better than the third quarter. But let me tell you what happened between the second quarter and the third quarter. The Trinidad and Tobago economy, according to the CSO, and this is published internationally now, grew in 3 months between July 2021 and September 21 by $5 billion. $5 billion. The quarterly GDP for that particular period was $44.5 billion. And if I go back to 2020, and I give you the figure for 2020, in the third quarter of 2020, between July and September 2020, middle of COVID, economic production in Trinidad and Tobago was $34.6 billion. In the third quarter of 2021, 1 year later, $44.6 billion. It grew by $10 billion year on year. But in one quarter, it grew by $5 billion. So the know-it-all experts, the naysayers, I think they're going to be a little confused. They might start to panic because according to them, Trinidad and Tobago is falling apart. That's what they say. They love that. But let me tell you something. I looked at all the sectors: mining and quarrying, manufacturing, food, beverages, textiles, petroleum and chemical products, construction, trade and repairs, transport, financial services, crude oil, condensate, natural gas, petroleum support services, manufacture of petrochemicals. Every single sector I've just called out there, everyone grew in 2021. Every single one. And I am seeing when the fourth quarter data comes in, I am going to have to revise all our statements with respect to the 2021 year. It appears that our GDP, instead of being $150 billion, which is what we estimated because we were being conservative, we didn't want to get caught out being overly optimistic, fudging the figures. So we used the first half of the year, which was not so good, and we estimated that for the whole year, our gross domestic product would be $150 billion. And with these figures, it's looking like it's closer to $170 billion. And let me tell you what that does for Trinidad and Tobago. Because your debt to GDP ratio, which is what the international rating agencies look at, when we go to meet with Standard & Poor's, with Moody's, when we go to meet with the international agencies, the World Bank, the IMF, that's what they look at. They look at our debt to GDP ratio. And because we were being conservative and using a low figure for GDP of $150 billion, we had stated that our debt to GDP last year was about 85%. And everybody, all the experts started to bawl, oh, unsustainable, Trinidad go collapse. Well, with these figures now, our debt to GDP ratio is going to drop below 80. It might go to 75%, just because of the figures, the correct figures being used. So I want to see what they go say now. Now that the data is coming out, that because of the fiscal measures of this government, because we kept the manufacturing sector going, because of all the support we put into the system, because of all the monetary policy, reducing the reserve requirement in the central bank, freeing up a lot of money in the system, reducing interest rates. We did all of that during the COVID period. Kept everything going, supported the business community, kept people in jobs so that they would have disposable income to support the retail trade, the wholesale trade. What this is now proving is that in all these sectors, all these non-oil sectors, and in the petroleum sector, and the petrochemical sector, and the construction sector, that there has been tremendous growth. In fact, when I look at what I am seeing here, if I just pull out one sector alone, if I pull out construction, what I'm seeing is that the construction sector grew by almost 100% in the 3-month period between July and September of 2021. So I'm telling you all of this because your government is in very good hands. Very good hands. Now there's something else I have to tell you. Because we have to deal with reality. We still have tremendous debt. Even though our debt to GDP ratio may go down, we still have to pay the debt, and the debt burden is significant. And we had to do it in order to keep the economy going. One of the problems with, and it's funny that I would call it a problem, you would have heard the Prime Minister speak about this already, but one of the problems with increases in the price of oil is that motor fuels, gasoline, diesel, kerosene, and so on, are produced from oil. And there's a direct relationship between the price of oil and the price of gas. Whether oil is produced here, or whether it is imported, or the gasoline is imported, the price of gasoline remains the same. There's something called an ex-refinery price. And what this government has been doing over the last 6 years, we have been subsidizing the price of fuel. But every time the oil price goes up, the price of fuel to Paria goes up, and the subsidy that the government has to pay goes up. I don't know how many of you follow oil prices. I'm sure many of you do, maybe most. If I looked at the oil price today, I saw it was about $108. $108. We budgeted the 2022 budget on a price of $65, and we put an amount for the subsidy in the budget. Let me tell you how much the fuel subsidy will be at an oil price of $100. The total subsidy would be $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion. That is what it will cost Trinidad and Tobago to subsidize gasoline and diesel at the current prices at an oil price of $100. Now, many years ago, under a former PNM administration, Eric Williams' government, they had this same problem with a rapid increase in the price of oil and a rapid increase in the price of gasoline. And they introduced legislation called the petroleum subsidy legislation. So oil companies have to pay a tax, a levy, which is put into a fund. It's called the petroleum fund, the petroleum subsidy fund. And this tax is imposed on oil at the prevailing price. So at a price of $100, the total subsidy on gasoline and diesel would be $2.4 billion, 2,400 million. The levy from the oil companies will generate $459 million, and the amount the government will have to pay using your money, taxpayers' dollars, is $1.94 billion. Just want you to hear these numbers, so that the government at an oil price of $100 has to take $2 billion of your money and subsidize gasoline and diesel. So these are realities we have to face. If we earn an additional $4 billion from better oil and gas prices in 2022, which is quite possible. I've been looking at the numbers. You might earn a $2 billion, a $3 billion, maybe $4 billion if things keep going. Would you think that we should take $2 billion out of that $4 billion and put it into subsidizing fuel? I just pose that question for you. And it is something we as a government have to look at very, very carefully. But coming back to the situation, I want you to understand that the data does not support the old talk outside there. An increase in GDP from one quarter to another, that's in a 3-month period of $5 billion, does not occur in a country that is falling apart. An increase in almost every economic sector does not occur in a country that is falling apart. This kind of economic performance that I am seeing here exists in a country that is well managed by this PNM administration. And we are going to be very careful very, very careful as a government to maintain the economic momentum which started in 2021. It will continue in 2022. We will continue that economic momentum. And whatever additional revenues we may get as a government, we are going to spend them very, very wisely in the public interest for the welfare of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is the PNM way. That is the only way we know how to do things. We are not reckless. We're not into gallery. We're into doing our work and to serving the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why our war cry is, great is the PNM, and it shall prevail. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Just come before blessings.